In this update, we're tracking a big storm riding up the East Coast this morning into the afternoon. In fact, about 40 million Americans today will experience some form of severe weather along the East Coast and do expect some power outages along the way. But the most damaging threat are going to be your damaging winds and some isolated tornadoes, especially around North Carolina. And then plus we'll take you through the rest of the week into next week, and plus look at some of the ensembles heading towards your Christmas. So if we take a look at the overall winds for today, you're really going to be packing a punch for those areas across Florida, up here towards Georgia, back into the Carolinas, and they really start to enhance as we get into North Carolina, where those deeper, darker reds start to appear. Some 50 to 60 mile per hour wind gust is not out of the question. Luckily, the strongest wind gust over almost 90 miles an hour will safely remain offshore. But once you get further north into Delaware, New Jersey, especially up here towards Long Island, get it into Massachusetts, Connecticut, into the Rhode Island area, that's where they do have some high wind watches in place, and easily some 60, possibly upwards to 70 mile per hour wind gusts is definitely not out of the question, as the low pressure center will continue to intensify, dumping some very heavy rain along its wake and some snow on the backside. So here's what the radar looks like this morning. The rain is breaking out already in the Florida Panhandle, coming across southeastern portions of Georgia, getting into the Carolinas as well as into Virginia. And that sneaks all the way up into the DC region, those areas into eastern Pennsylvania, New York, and eventually heading over into Massachusetts and Connecticut, into Rhode Island. Nantucket's going to get crushed this afternoon with very high wind gusts over almost 70 mile per hour. And then some transition this morning will give way to just mostly rain this afternoon. But there is some snow, at least sporadic snow on the backside, through eastern areas of Kentucky, back into eastern areas of Tennessee, and eventually heading up to Ohio. But here's the severe storms this afternoon. They did in fact upgrade this to a slight risk for some of those getting a little bit stronger, upwards to that 65 mile per hour wind gust, and some isolated tornadoes within the Wilmington area, back into Norfolk, as well as, you know, essentially just right along the coast. The further along in the coast you live, the more intense I think the storms will be, especially in North Carolina, where they do have an enhanced risk for tornadic activity. So don't be surprised. Don't rule it out, you know, a couple of tornadoes within this sector from Wilmington back into Morehead City, into Cape Lookout, up here to Cape Hatteras, into Kitty Hawk. Those areas into Greenville, definitely be on high alert this afternoon. Those strong storms will be heading your way and really kind of packing a punch as we head into the afternoon. And, you know, like, again, some of these areas could get pretty intense winds. The most severe threat is going to be your damaging winds with this activity that's going to be racing across the eastern seaboard. And yes, it does in fact, because since it encompasses essentially from Florida to Maine, about 40 million Americans will likely get some sort of severe weather activity today alone, just off the East Coast. And here's your snow that's going to impact those areas, especially within the Great Lakes. We've seen crazy amounts of lake effect snow already. We're going to be adding to those totals over the next 24 to 48 hours, especially along the Great Lakes, into those areas across Erie, Pennsylvania. I think I read it's upwards to almost 50, 60 inches of snow already in Erie, Pennsylvania so far for the season. So definitely they've been packing that snow in feet up there into the Northeast. So the breakdown over the last 10 days to start December has been kind of looking like this, right? I mean, if you live essentially to the west, basically, you know, west of the Continental Divide, you've been experiencing more of a milder December. And if you live east, and definitely you've been feeling the effect of that cross-polar flow. And this has been the coldest anomalies. And in the middle, it's been kind of more or less average if you average all the temperatures out. But yeah, the coldest anomalies actually have been all the way into the Carolinas and even into Florida. If you can believe that, it's been very strange. Yes, Florida has been getting crushed with series of cold fronts. And I think that actually might continue actually in the weeks ahead for those areas across the Carolinas and even into Florida. So here's the snowfall picture, as far as snowfall on the ground currently right now. It's about 19% of the nation has some sort of snow on the ground, obviously, especially towards the northern regions, especially into those higher elevation areas. And right now, as we head into tomorrow, what we're going to be finding is that polar jet is going to start to retreat somewhat. So that means the coldest air will start to take a little bit of a respite, especially out east, and those coldest anomalies will start to retreat back up into Canada, as we'll have a little bit more ridging that's been predominantly out west. We'll be sharing those warmer temperatures with the central part of the U.S., as we'll be watching yet another trough that's going to be coming off the Pacific Northwest into northern California. So yes, that definitely means more rain for you guys along the coast into Washington and Oregon and northern California. Unfortunately, it stays dry for southern California. Much of the desert Southwest, much of the Rockies stays dry. You can see the tight isobar, so it's still going to be windy even as we go into Thursday, but definitely the coldest anomalies keep retreating further north you live, and it eventually sneaks back up into Canada, and it's going to take the snow along with it. So by Thursday afternoon, most of what's happening today will be safely moved off the eastern coast, while we'll be watching this other disturbance out west, bringing more heavy rains to those areas across the west coast, and not getting too much further inland. But what it's going to do is going to bring those warmer anomalies sneaking back into the middle part of the country. And yes, this is definitely still on the colder side, but not nearly as cold as what you experienced over the last 10 days. But we'll be watching another little disturbance that's coming across. It's going to be pulses of energy, waves of moisture going to be moving across the central U.S. It kind of skips the central part, but it more or less, once it more in lines with the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to be picking up more additional moisture into East Texas, back into Louisiana, as well as into Arkansas. This is during the day on Saturday, getting into Missouri, back into Illinois, as well as into Iowa. And if we move the needle into Sunday, that rain just moves further into the east. So now it's going to be impacting those areas into Kentucky, back into Tennessee, as well as into West Virginia, getting them back into Ohio, and eventually heading further north. But notice there's no snow, right? Because there's not going to be much colder air left with that retreatness of that colder anomalies back up into Canada. And eventually it's going to look like this by the time we head into the middle of the month. As we head towards Sunday, milder air kind of takes over and gives a respite from that cross-polar flow that's been so prevalent over the last 10 days of December, and especially for those areas across the south as we head into Monday with the south wind kicking in and sometimes a westerly wind. We see hardly any areas actually below freezing for your high temperatures for your Monday. It's only the mountain regions, but we're talking 60s spreading further north back into Missouri, 70s further south, and even sporting some 80s back into the deep south of Texas. So it's going to be definitely a warmer day coming up on your Monday, but yet another little disturbance will be moving across. So as we head into Monday, we'll be watching that other disturbance that's coming across. I think it's going to be really kind of aligning towards those eastern areas of Texas, back into Arkansas, as well as into Missouri, as far as precipitation totals over that 24-hour time span. And then as we move into Tuesday for your 17th time frame, yes, just more additional moisture will be coming back into play into Louisiana, Indiana, back into Wisconsin, into Michigan. And then, as we head into your 18th of the month, your December 18th, that precipitation will now be moved over into the northeast, but overall drying out for a good part of the country and still remaining on the warm side out west. So I don't think the warmer anomalies go anywhere anytime soon. The latest European ensembles hints as another cool shot, probably not as cold as what we experienced in the first 10 days, but definitely another cool shot likely on the table for those areas across the Great Lakes, into the Northeast, into the Carolinas, as well as into the Southeast, and yes, into Florida again. The central U.S. will kind of take more of a glancing blow as what they've seen, and those areas across the West will be remaining on the much warmer side. The GFS ensembles is not as bullish as far as the cooler anomalies. It keeps the warmer temperatures around. So are some discrepancies back into the global models as we look at some of the extended data heading into that 18th and 23rd time frame. But both of them are fairly consistent. At least some sort of cooler weather will be on the table moving across into the east. But overall, there's not really terribly too much snow going to be adding to these totals. So here's your snowfall over the next 10 days. Other than the same areas that's been getting the snow as of late, we'll be adding to those areas across the Great Lakes and some of the areas that have seen the snow already, but there's not really any new places or any new snowfall that's going to be taking place over the next 10 days that will add to the overall U.S. snow cover as we head towards Christmas time frame. And if we look at the precipitation, if we add all that up over the next 10 days on the blend of models, yes, as you would normally think in a La Nina, it's wet along the West Coast into the Pacific Northwest, much of Northern California. That's pretty normal for a La Nina. It's also normal to be dry across the southwestern regions, back into the Rockies, getting into West Texas and the central U.S. is what we have been seeing, but it's not really until you get to the Gulf of Mexico where it gets more alignment of a south wind from the Gulf. You need moisture, and it gets it from the Gulf of Mexico, and that's where predominantly most of the rain will be. And that's going to be, going to be most of the areas over the next 10 days will be as well. So if you live in East Texas, if you live in Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, back into Illinois, those areas into Western Kentucky will likely get more rain on the table over the next 10 days, as much as the East Coast, and a little bit lighter amounts further south into the Southeast and heading down into Florida, over the next 10 days. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely hit the subscribe button and catch the next update. Why I protect you before and after the storm.